Welcome back to Horror Town, where the nightmares never end and the terror is always lurking around the corner. Today, we bring you two spine-chilling true stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. So, buckle up and get ready for a ride through the darkest corners of the human psyche. But be warned, these stories are not for the faint of heart, so if you're brave enough to watch, stick around. Maria had always been fascinated by the paranormal. She had grown up hearing stories of ghostly apparitions and haunted houses, and she had always been drawn to the unknown. So when she got a job working at the local hospital, she was thrilled. She knew that hospitals were notorious for their paranormal activity, and she couldn't wait to see if the stories were true. At first, everything seemed normal. Maria went about her duties as a nurse, tending to patients and keeping the wards clean. But as the days went by, she started to notice strange things happening. One night, as she was making her rounds, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from an empty room. She went to investigate, but when she opened the door, there was no one there. Another time, she saw a patient in the hallway who had been discharged earlier that day. When she went to check on him, he had vanished without a trace. Maria tried to brush off these strange occurrences, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the hospital. She started to do some research and discovered that the hospital had a dark past. Years ago, the hospital had been the site of a gruesome murder. A patient had gone on a rampage, killing several doctors and nurses before taking his own life. Some said that his spirit still haunted the hospital, seeking revenge on those who had wronged him. Maria tried to ignore these stories, but she couldn't help feeling like she was being watched. She started to have nightmares, vivid dreams of the killer coming for her in the dead of night. One night, as she was working a late shift, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. She tried to ignore them, but they grew louder and more insistent. And then she saw him, the killer, standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. Maria froze, unable to move as the killer started walking towards her. Maria was paralyzed with fear as the killer approached her. She could see the anger in his eyes, and she knew that he was not of this world. She tried to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, unable to escape the killer's grasp. The killer got closer and closer, his breathing ragged and heavy. Maria could hear his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Just when she thought all was lost, a sudden burst of courage surged through her. She mustered all her strength and bolted towards the nearest exit. The killer was hot on her heels, his breath hot on her neck. Maria could feel his presence closing in on her, but she refused to give up. As she reached the door, she fumbled with the lock, desperate to escape. Finally, with a loud click, the door swung open. Maria stumbled outside, gasping for breath. She turned around, ready to face the killer, but he was gone. Maria felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew that the horror wasn't over yet. She had to find a way to put an end to the killer's reign of terror. She spent the next few days researching the hospital's history, trying to find any information she could on the killer. And then she found it, a record of his death certificate. According to the certificate, the killer had died in the hospital not long after his rampage. Maria realized that his spirit was still trapped in the hospital, unable to move on. With this knowledge, Maria knew what she had to do. She gathered a group of her colleagues and led them on a ghost hunt through the hospital, determined to put an end to the killer's haunting. As they made their way through the darkened halls, they could feel the killer's presence growing stronger, but they refused to give up. Finally, they reached the room where the killer had died. Maria stepped forward, holding out a cross and reciting a prayer. To her surprise, the killer's spirit appeared before her, but instead of attacking, he simply looked at her with sadness in his eyes. Maria could feel the weight of his pain and sorrow, and she knew that he had been trapped in the hospital for too long. With a heavy heart, Maria led her team out of the hospital, leaving the killer's spirit to finally find peace. After their encounter with the killer's spirit, Maria and her team continued to investigate the hospital's paranormal activity. They discovered that there were many other spirits trapped in the hospital, and they worked tirelessly to help them find peace. Years went by, and Maria became known as the hospital's resident ghost hunter. She continued to explore the unknown, always searching for answers to the mysteries of the afterlife. But despite her success, Maria never forgot about the killer's spirit. She knew that his tragedy had left a permanent mark on the hospital, and she felt a sense of obligation to keep his memory alive. So, she wrote a book about her experiences, detailing the horrors she had encountered and the ghosts she had helped to find peace. The book became a bestseller, and Maria became known as one of the world's leading paranormal investigators. But even with all her success, Maria never forgot about the killer's spirit. She knew that he would always be a part of the hospital's history, and she hoped that one day he would find the peace he deserved. Years later, as Maria lay on her deathbed, she felt a sudden chill in the air. She knew that the killer's spirit had come to say goodbye. She closed her eyes and felt a sense of peace wash over her. The hospital would always be haunted, but she knew that the ghosts were no longer trapped in their eternal torment. As Maria took her last breath, she knew that she had fulfilled her mission. She had brought peace to the hospital, and she had helped countless spirits find their way to the other side. And as her spirit left her body, she could feel the presence of the killer's spirit, finally at peace after all these years. Rachel had just started her new job at the local hospital. She was excited to be working in a field where she could help people, and she loved the fast-paced nature of the job. But her excitement soon turned to terror when she started working the night shift. The hospital was an old building, and it had a reputation for being haunted. At first, Rachel didn't believe the stories. But as she worked more and more nights, she started to experience strange things. One night, as she was checking on a patient, she saw a shadowy figure move across the room. She thought it was just her imagination, but then she heard a voice whisper her name. Rachel spun around, but there was no one there. She felt a chill run down her spine, and she knew that something was wrong. As the nights went on, Rachel's experiences grew more intense. She started to see apparitions in the hallways, and she could hear the sounds of footsteps coming from empty rooms. But the worst experience came one night when she was alone in the hospital's morgue. She was putting away a body when she heard a strange noise coming from one of the drawers. She slowly approached the drawer and opened it, expecting to find a stray animal or something of the sort. But instead, she found something far more terrifying. Inside the drawer was a corpse, but its eyes were open and staring directly at her. Rachel screamed and slammed the drawer shut, but the eyes continued to haunt her. From that moment on, Rachel knew that the hospital was not just haunted, it was dangerous. She tried to quit her job, but her boss wouldn't let her go. Rachel was trapped, forced to endure the horror of the hospital night after night. She knew that she had to find a way out, but she didn't know how. Rachel's nights at the hospital continued to be filled with terror. She was constantly on edge, never sure what horrors awaited her around each corner. One night, as she was walking down the dimly lit hallway, she heard a faint whispering. She couldn't make out the words, but the voice sounded familiar. She followed the sound to a supply closet, but when she opened the door, there was no one there. She was about to leave when she heard the whispering again. This time, she realized that the voice belonged to a patient who had died earlier that day. The voice was begging for help, pleading with Rachel to set them free. Rachel knew that she couldn't ignore the patient's desperate cries for help. She knew that she had to do something to ease their suffering. She started to do some research and discovered that the hospital had a dark history. Over the years, there had been reports of mistreatment of patients, medical experiments, and even cases of murder. Rachel realized that the hospital was a hotbed of paranormal activity, and that the spirits of the patients who had died there were trapped in eternal torment. Determined to help these restless spirits find peace, Rachel started to explore the hospital's hidden corners. She searched for clues, trying to find anything that could help her put an end to the hospital's haunting. One night, as she was exploring the abandoned basement, she found something that turned her blood cold. It was an old patient file, documenting the case of a patient who had been subjected to brutal medical experiments. Rachel knew that this was the key to ending the hospital's haunting. She shared the information with her colleagues, and they started to investigate the hospital's dark past. As they delved deeper into the hospital's history, they uncovered more and more disturbing secrets. They discovered that the hospital had been involved in illegal medical experiments, and that many patients had suffered terrible fates. Rachel knew that she had to put an end to the hospital's haunting once and for all. She and her colleagues performed a powerful cleansing ritual, using salt and holy water to drive out the malevolent spirits. At first, it seemed as if their efforts had been successful. The hospital was quiet, and the spirits seemed to have been vanquished. But then, on a dark and stormy night, Rachel heard a voice whispering her name. She knew that the haunting was not over, and that the hospital's dark past would continue to haunt her for the rest of her life. Despite Rachel's best efforts, the haunting at the hospital persisted. She tried to put it behind her, but she could feel the spirits calling out to her, begging for help. Years went by, and Rachel became a successful nurse. She worked at different hospitals, never staying in one place for too long. But no matter where she went, she could still feel the presence of the hospital's restless spirits. She knew that she had to find a way to put an end to their suffering. Rachel started to research ways to communicate with the dead. She learned about the ancient practice of mediumship and began to practice it herself. At first, her attempts to communicate with the spirits were fruitless, but as she honed her skills, she started to make progress. One night, Rachel was sitting in her living room, practicing her mediumship. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that the spirits were trying to communicate with her. She closed her eyes and focused on the presence in the room. And then, she heard it, a faint whispering, calling out to her. Rachel listened carefully, and she could make out the voice of one of the hospital's restless spirits. The spirit was pleading for help, asking Rachel to put an end to their suffering. With tears in her eyes, Rachel agreed to help the spirit. She knew that she had to return to the hospital and confront the spirits once and for all. She gathered a team of paranormal investigators and returned to the hospital. They explored the darkened halls, searching for the spirits that still haunted the building. As they made their way through the hospital, they encountered many restless spirits. Some were angry and vengeful, while others were simply lost and confused. But Rachel refused to give up. She used her skills as a medium to communicate with the spirits, offering them comfort and guidance. Finally, after hours of exploring the hospital, Rachel and her team reached the morgue. It was there that they encountered the most malevolent spirit of all, the spirit of a doctor who had performed brutal experiments on his patients. The spirit was angry and vengeful, seeking revenge on anyone who crossed his path. But Rachel refused to give in to his anger. She spoke to the spirit, offering him forgiveness and understanding. And then, to the amazement of everyone present, the spirit dissipated into the ether, finally finding peace. With the hospital's haunting finally at an end, Rachel knew that she had fulfilled her destiny. She had helped the spirits find peace, and she had put an end to the horror that had haunted her for so long. As she left the hospital for the final time, Rachel felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that the spirits were finally at rest, and that she had played a part in their journey towards the light. Thanks for watching Horror Town, where we bring you the scariest true stories from the depths of the unknown. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on our latest terrifying tales. And as always, stay safe out there, because you never know what might be lurking in the shadows.